markets are penetrated and cornered, in which resources are grabbed like the oil companies are doing in the Arctic. These corporations and banks are also instruments, but not the only instruments, but instruments of ownership and control by the capitalist class. The point I'm making is that these corporations and banks are pieces, not the only pieces, but they are pieces on a global chessboard of capitalism imperialism. And this chessboard, this brutal playing field, operates according to certain rules of the game. Look, if a basketball player kicked a ball down the court like a soccer ball, well then that player would be penalized and the whole game would be over because you can't play basketball like soccer. Well, so too, capitalism has its rules. And let's look at those rules. Rule number one, everything under capitalism is a commodity and everything is produced for profit. What I mean is everything under capitalism is produced in order to be exchanged, in order to be sold. Now things have to be useful to be sold, but what's actually produced, how it's produced, where it's produced, all of this is measured and motivated by profit. Whether we're talking about housing, computers, medicine, energy, or whatever. And profit comes from the exploitation of billions of human beings on this planet. And criminally, under capitalism, the environment, the ecosystems of this planet, like the rainforest in Ecuador where Texaco drilled for oil, is something to be seized and plundered for profit. Rule number two, capitalist production is privately owned and driven forward by the commandment, expand or die. ExxonMobil and Royal Dutch Shell, or Credit Suisse and JP Morgan Chase are fighting each other for market share. They are driven to extend their investments to cheapen costs, not mainly due to personal greed, but because if they don't expand, if they don't keep accumulating profit and more profit for their war chest, if they don't more ruthlessly exploit wage labor, well then they won't stay alive. They'll go under or be gobbled up by some other unit of capital. You see, competition runs through this whole capitalist system. It's beat or be beaten up. When British Petroleum, when BP, was cleaning up that oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, you didn't see other oil companies coming to share their expertise and oceanographic equipment with BP. No, these other companies, they wanted to take advantage of the situation. And Shell and ExxonMobil were reportedly, and this is reported in the New York Times, quote, licking their chops at the prospect of BP going under, because that gave them the possibility of gobbling up BP. And this expand or die compulsion, this leads to bigger and more powerful units of capital coming into being. Rule number three, capitalist rule number three, is the drive for global control and dominance. Capitalism is a worldwide system. There's a great divide in the world between the rich imperialist countries and the poor oppressed countries of the third world. And on this global playing field, corporations and banks compete for global influence and control, like the oil companies going off the coast of West Africa or Nigeria. But the most intense form of rivalry is between contending world powers for strategic position and dominance and advantage over regions, markets, and resources. And this global rivalry has led to wars of conquest, like what the U.S. did in the Philippines, or the French in Algeria,
Puerto Rico,
or the U.S. invasion in Iraq, exactly, the annexation of Puerto Rico. And this drive for global control and domination led to 2 world wars in the 20th century. So these are the three rules of the game. Profit based on the exploitation of wage labor, expand or die, and this drive for global dominance. And whether we're talking about a corporation or a bank, these units of capital, these units of ownership have to answer to these rules of the game, to the economic laws of capitalism. And these banks and corporations, in all their exploitative, parasitic ways, are actually essential and functional pieces of the capitalist system as it operates according to these rules. Now, in his book, Basics, from the talks and writings of Bob Avakian, there's a really good quote. It's in chapter 1, and it's this passage, number 6, that sums up capitalism imperialism. And I want to read this quote. Imperialism means huge monopolies and financial institutions controlling the economies and the political systems and the lives of people, not just in one country, but all over the world. Imperialism means parasitic exploiters who oppress hundreds of millions of people and condemn them to untold misery. Vast amounts of wealth from one place to another. Imperialism, these parasitic financiers can cause billions to starve just by pressing a computer key. Just by pressing a computer key and thereby shifting vast amounts of wealth from one place to another. Imperialism means war. War to put down the resistance and rebellion of the oppressed, and wars between rival imperialist states. It means the leaders of these states can condemn humanity to unbelievable devastation, perhaps even total annihilation, with a push of a button. Imperialism is capitalism at the stage where the basic contradictions have been raised to tremendously explosive levels. But imperialism also means that there will be revolution, the oppressed rising up to overthrow their exploiters and tormentors, and this revolution will be a worldwide struggle to sweep away the global monster imperialism. I'm going to finish it. So these economic laws that I've laid out, those three economic laws, are at the root of the capitalist imperialist system. But the preservation and extension of this system requires a state power, a state system. You see, capital is private and competing, but the capitalists of a given country, like the US or France or Russia or Germany, these have common interests, common national imperialist interests. The state power in France acts to safeguard the common strategic interests of French capital, and so too in Japan or Russia. See, this capitalist class dominates the economy. It controls the major means of production, land, raw materials, and other resources, technology, and physical structures like factories. And the government, this government, is a key part of a state power that is controlled by the capitalist class, no matter who is president. But this state plays a special role in society. It is not acting in the interest of this or that bank or corporation. This state power acts to protect and expand the economic system and to keep the whole society functioning as a capitalist society. And what are the key things that this state does? Well, it holds a monopoly on the legitimate use of force. It deploys the police and courts and prisons to suppress any resistance from below. We saw in the 1960s how the government moved to crush the Black Panther Party. Here in New York City, the police arrest anti-war demonstrators and those who marched across the Brooklyn Bridge. And each year they stop and frisk 750,000 of Black and Latino youth as part of exercising social control over a marginalized and potentially rebellious section of the population. This state taxes and spends to create infrastructure. It provides a central banking system. It sets laws for the exploitation of wage labor, of labor power. And all this serves the interest of capital. And the U.S. state acts to safeguard a global empire. It builds up a huge military machine of death and destruction. It has established over 700 military bases in over 100 countries.